China makes its first real move in the Iran conflict, raising new challenges for Washington and the Trump administration.
China has made its first significant move in the ongoing conflict involving Iran, creating new strategic challenges for Washington and the Trump administration. Beijing is now working to protect its economic and geopolitical interests across the Gulf region. As China moves closer to a more active role, some of Iran's allies are becoming uneasy about the shifting balance of power in the Middle East. Tensions have also risen in the Strait of Hormuz after a Chinese-owned vessel reportedly passed through the contested waters, drawing the attention of global partners already concerned about the escalating situation. At the same time, the United States has increased its naval presence in the region to secure vital oil shipping routes. Meanwhile, Iran appears to be leaning increasingly toward cooperation with Chinese President Xi Jinping. While headlines around the world focused on Donald Trump's escalating confrontation with Iran, another quieter but equally important struggle began unfolding behind the scenes, a battle over control of the critical oil routes that keep the global economy running. According to diplomatic sources cited by Reuters, China quietly opened discussions with Iran to ensure that shipments of oil and Qatari liquefied natural gas could continue moving safely through the tense waters of the Strait of Hormuz. These talks reportedly focused on guaranteeing uninterrupted passage for energy cargo, a step aimed at protecting China's own supply lines as instability in the region intensified. China is believed to have urged Iran to allow crude oil and LNG shipments to continue flowing, emphasizing that its energy security depends heavily on open and stable trade routes through this narrow but crucial maritime corridor. These negotiations took place as the joint U.S. and Israeli military campaign against Iran entered its sixth day, with the conflict already beginning to disrupt one of the most important energy pathways in the world. The Strait of Hormuz, a strategic lifeline for global oil markets, was nearly shut down, threatening close to 1/5 of all oil and gas shipments transported across international waters every day. Iran responded with a firm warning, announcing that vessels belonging to the United States, Israel, Europe, or their allies would not be allowed to pass through the strait. The announcement sent shockwaves through international markets and raised fears of a prolonged global energy crisis. However, analysts noticed one important detail in Iran's statement: China was not mentioned. This omission was widely interpreted as deliberate, suggesting that Tehran was leaving a diplomatic opening for Beijing during this critical moment. Shortly afterward, maritime tracking data captured global attention. A vessel named Iron Maiden was seen navigating through the heavily monitored Strait of Hormuz. According to the Times of Israel, the ship was broadcasting a signal identifying it as Chinese-owned, a sign that China's negotiations with Iran may already be producing results despite the growing conflict. China, the world's second-largest economy, relies heavily on the Strait of Hormuz for energy supplies. Nearly 45% of its total oil imports pass through this narrow waterway, making its security essential for Beijing. Despite its close relationship with Iran, China is reportedly uneasy about Tehran's decision to restrict access to the strait. Sources cited by Reuters say Beijing has urged all sides to act responsibly, protect commercial vessels, and ensure that the Strait of Hormuz remains open to global trade. China currently purchases around 90% of Iran's oil exports and accounts for more than 30% of Iran's total trade, highlighting how deeply interconnected their economies have become. Meanwhile, global oil prices have surged more than 15% since the outbreak of the conflict, fueled by disrupted production and repeated attacks on key energy infrastructure. Iranian missile strikes have reportedly reached targets as far as Cyprus, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. Developments that have sent further shockwaves through international markets. Several major economies are warning that the worsening energy shock could trigger another wave of global inflation and threaten fragile economic recoveries. Recent shipping data paints a troubling picture. Tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz dropped dramatically to just 4 crude oil shipments on March 1st, compared to a daily average of 24 since January. Nearly 300 oil tankers are now stranded inside the strait, effectively trapped as heavy fighting continues around one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. Shipping executives report that only Chinese or Iranian-owned vessels are currently attempting to move through the contested waters. The near standstill in maritime trade has placed increasing pressure on President Trump's administration as rising energy prices and inflation fears ripple across global markets. In response, President Trump announced that the United States Navy will begin escorting commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz to guarantee their safe passage. Despite this announcement, hundreds of oil and LNG carriers remain anchored or have rerouted their journeys to avoid the conflict zone. According to NBC News, Iran's major allies, China and Russia, have so far avoided providing direct military support, choosing a cautious diplomatic approach instead of entering the conflict. However, both Beijing and Moscow issued strong statements condemning the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, calling the event a dangerous escalation. During an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council, China sharply criticized the joint U.S.-Israeli military strikes against Iran and called for restraint and renewed diplomatic dialogue. The coordinated attacks by the United States and Israel were launched on February 28th and reportedly resulted in the death of Ayatollah Khamenei, triggering outrage across the Middle East. In retaliation, Iran launched strikes against U.S. allies throughout the Gulf region and targeted American and Israeli naval forces operating near its territorial waters. As tensions continue to rise, the conflict is rapidly transforming from a regional crisis into a global power struggle, with energy security, military alliances, and economic stability all hanging in the balance. And as leaders around the world call for unity and cooperation, one message continues to echo across the political landscape. For the good of our nation, let's work together and truly make America great again.